Hey, how's it going? In today's video, we're going to take a look at the old TV series, The Spectacular Spider-Man. This video was requested by Hempy from the comment section. Roll the intro. Spectacular Spider-Man was created by Greg Weisman and Victor Cook. Weisman attended graduate school while working at DC Comics in the editorial department. While at DC Comics, Weisman wrote a 4-issue miniseries for Black Canary and also co-wrote Captain Atom alongside Cary Bates. After graduate school, Weisman worked as a development executive at Disney. This is where he created the series Gargoyles.
Hi, I'm Greg Weisman, Director of Series Development for Walt Disney Television Animation. We've got a new series coming your way in the fall of 1994, and we're very excited about it. We think it's something very new for Disney, and it's all about gargoyles. Ugly stone statues that squat on the roofs of old buildings. But 1,000 years ago, gargoyles were real living creatures. During the day, they slept, frozen in stone. But when the sun went down, Goliath, the gargoyle master, would lead his gargoyle warriors in defense of the king's castle. And if there was no battle to be fought, he'd retreat to the library to read and learn, all the while making sure that the other gargoyles stayed out of trouble. Now, for all these efforts, Goliath received no reward, no thanks, or even kindness. In fact, the people of the castle treated all gargoyles with nothing but contempt. Still, Goliath could no more stop guarding the castle than breathing the air. It's part of a gargoyle's nature to be territorial, protective. And so, for years, he maintained his lonely vigil. Then one night, Goliath was betrayed and lured away from his post. The castle was overrun and sacked. Goliath and the surviving gargoyles were unfairly blamed, and the kingdom sorcerer laid a curse upon them that put them into a stone sleep that lasted 1,000 years.
This is also where Weisman met Victor Cook, who was a storyboard artist for Gargoyles at the time. Cook previously worked on other Disney animation series like Darkwing Duck and Buzz Lightyear, also as a storyboard artist.
No, Your Honor, I swear I had no idea she was underwater.
Weisman applied to work on a Spider-Man series that Sony Pictures Television wanted to produce. It wasn't until almost a year that he found out that him and Cook were chosen to create a Spider-Man series.
I interviewed for the show in, I want to say, February of 2007, January, February of 2007. I think before, Michael, you were involved with it. And then, you know, months and months passed, by which time I sort of took for granted that I hadn't gotten the job. And then in December of that year, so we're talking at least 10 or 11 months, I'm at a Christmas party at Dwayne Capizzi's house. And a guy walks up to me and congratulates me on getting the Spider-Man gig, and I'm like, no, I didn't get it. You know, I interviewed for it like almost a year ago. I definitely didn't get it. And he's like, no, you did. I'm like, what? And my agent was also at that party, so I went to my agent and I said, this guy just congratulated me for getting the Spider-Man gig. Do you know anything about this? And he's like, no. And we'd all heard that other people had gotten it over the months and stuff like that. And I think they went through at least a couple people or something. But we hadn't heard anything about it. And then that was like, you know, on a weekend or something like that. And then on Monday, I got a call from Michael and Grace Bent. And they asked me to come in immediately. And I'm like, okay. And then like almost immediately when I got off the phone, I got a call from Marvel saying they wanted me to come in the next day. And then it became clear that Sony wanted to make sure they met with me before Marvel did.
Weisman was chosen to work on the Spider-Man series because Sony Pictures liked this Gargoyle series.
I will say that one of the reasons that Greg ended up getting this call at the 11th hour. There's just one word that sums it up, and that word is gargoyles. That there was Greg came in with a great pitch. A lot of people came in. I mean, as you can imagine, when you kind of throw it out to the animation writers of LA and say, give us your take on Spider-Man, everybody comes in and they pitch what they would do with it, and Greg's pitch was great. But the thing that actually put Sony over the edge on Greg, after I pointed it out to a few people that weren't as familiar, was actually Gargoyles, and what an amazing show it was for its time, and how it was this epic serialized show that had these amazing characters, and that even though it was a straight down the line boys action show, there was a lot more going on. And when you're going to take one of the most popular comic book characters of all time and put him on the big screen, maybe let's do a show where you're going to actually build out that world and build out those characters. And so really you can thank Goliath for that 11th hour call.
Fair enough.
Catch up full hour Saturday mornings beginning at 9:30 on the CW for Kids.
Spectacular Spider-Man premiered on March 8th in 2008. The series lasted for 2 seasons with a total of 26 episodes. The series had action sequences that would put most live-action series of that time to shame, an easily recognizable art style that was both contemporary and iconic, a storyline that carried a lot of heart that didn't turn to forced melodrama. The Spectacular Spider-Man was easily the best portrayal of the animated version of Spider-Man.
Who are you? Why, I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, of course.
The Spectacular Spider-Man was supposed to reinvent the character for a more modern audience, and this change is reflected in the art style and the storylines that followed. Cook wanted Spider-Man to look like the comic book, but couldn't because of budget constraints. Cook and Weisman were fans of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man and wanted Spider-Man to move really fast and elegant with lots of kinetic energy. The simple designs of the characters was because of the budget. Another inspiration for the series was the Lupin III movie, Castle Cagliostro, directed by Miyazaki.
And immediately, so that we can talk to you before you go into Marvel to make sure that you don't say anything that makes Marvel mad, that'll be good.
Well, I go to Vic Cook next. Vic, you had done 101 Dalmatians, the series, the Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, Legend of Tarzan, a lot of the Disney characters you had experience with. This was a jump into something that people hold a even stronger reverence for in terms of Spider-Man. What was your trepidation, or what was your experience maybe with Spider-Man before you agreed to take this on for yourself?
I was just a fan of Spider-Man. That was my only experience before this. But watching all the previous Marvel animated shows, and I liked a lot of them, but the approach, the visual approach, was to sort of make it look like the comic book, which is a great idea, but then production-wise, budget-wise, it didn't really move as smoothly or move as cinematically as you wanted. So with all this Disney experience and some of the other influences, I thought, God, it'd be really great if we could get some classic animation squash and stretch and be a little bit cartoony with it. I had kind of two influences in my head. One was Castle Cagliostro, which is directed by Miyazaki.
Yeah.
Which is, if you look at the staging of that, it's a movie. It's live action. And the characters are designed in such a way that when it's dramatic, but when they have to go over the top and yell, all of a sudden their jaws don't connect. I mean, it's like they really yell big.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I daydreamed in my head, J. Jonah Jameson yelling like that at Peter Parker.
Yeah.
Weisman also explained that it was also difficult to find the right voice cast for the characters. Eventually, after a meeting with Sony, Josh Keaton, James Taylor, Lacey Chabert, and Vanessa Marshall were cast to play Peter Parker, Harry Osborn, Gwen Stacy, and Mary Jane Watson.
You know, the casting process for this show was brutal because there were so many corporate entities involved in the show. And one of these corporate entities, or at least one person at one of these corporate entities, were like, you know, usually you audition all these people and then you submit, 4 or 5 choices to the suits. You've got your pick, but one lesson I learned really early on is you only submit people that you could live with. I once was on a show, not Spider-Man, but a show where the producer had one person that he just was positive was right for a role, but the executive was asking for choice. So the person put the one person that he really wanted, and then to give choice, made the second choice the worst audition he had received. So of course, inevitably, the executive went for the one that he thought was just atrocious. And I was a junior executive, and I advised against this, but when that happened, I said, well, let's see if we can keep working, or that kind of thing. And we didn't wind up with the awful person. But the point is that on this show, again, you usually get a handful, somewhere between 3 and 5 choices to give the executives. And this time out, the executives wanted 10 choices per character. And they also wanted us to audition a huge amount of characters. Mm-hmm. And normally, the leads, you're auditioning 4 or 5 characters for a show, particularly a show like Spider-Man, where you've really only got one lead. We had a huge ensemble cast surrounding Spider-Man. There was really only one lead, and that's, Peter. Yeah. But they wanted us to audition for MJ and for Gwen and for Harry Osborn and Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin and Venom and Venom's alter ego and Aunt May and Jonah, and it was just like, oh my God, you want 10 times 13 characters choices for? And so we went through this huge audition process. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of actors. And then, a huge callback process. And then finally we're going into this meeting. And right before the meeting, Vic and Michael and our voice and casting director, Jamie Thomas, and I sat down to go through. And we had clear choices, including, obviously, Josh and Vanessa. But clear choices that we wanted for everyone. And we were like, all of us were like, okay, we've got to go in there and be prepared for a fight, because we had no idea what Sony, other than Michael, what the other Sony executives, let alone what Marvel was going to want. And so we got into this conference room in the horrible Apple building where we worked. It was called the Apple building because for some reason there was a big picture of an apple painted on the side.
That was Sony's janky animation building with like a drug park next to it that you couldn't go hang out in because there was too many needles. It was
well,
like
no windows, pallets everywhere.
You heard it here first.
The first floor was literally a warehouse for storing sets and props for Sony live action studio, and then the windowless second floor was where they stuck animation. And so we go into this conference room, again, windowless, dark, dank room. I can't tell you how awful that space was. But, and I am totally ready for a fight, to fight for all these characters. And the first thing that happens is, all right, well, obviously, let's start with Peter Parker / Spider-Man. Who do you want? And I was almost literally like, Josh Keaton! Like, I was so ready. And everyone was like, yeah, Josh was my first choice too. Yeah, I really like Josh. Yeah. And I'm like, it was like a sitcom moment. That moment where I'm like, no, it's going to be Oh, you guys like Josh too. Oh, good. And then they're like, who do you want for, I don't remember. Obviously, Spider-Man was first. I don't remember literally who the second character was. But character after character, I'm like this. I am totally ready to do battle for our choices, and there's no argument whatsoever.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, Aunt May, literally right down the line, we were all in agreement.
Rather than making the show entirely episodic, the creators tried to have a linear narrative that led to the next development. Combine this with the most touching portrayal of Uncle Ben ever shown on screen in a hilarious, quippy Spider-Man, it's hard not to see why this is a fan favorite series. Also, fun fact, originally they wanted to use Kingpin in the series, but couldn't at the time because they didn't own the rights to the character. That's why in this series they had Tombstone took on the crime boss role.
And then there were a couple things that, legal reasons we couldn't do. Like, we had planned to use Kingpin, who was originally a Spider-Man character, but by the time we got around to Spider-Man, Kingpin had been sort of, how would you call it, like sequestered off in the Daredevil life.
He was at Fox, and there was no way, we tried. There was a lot of arguing and pleading and debating, but...
Is that why Tombstone becomes the main villain in the first season? He kind of replaces Kingpin because of that?
He absolutely just took the place of the Kingpin, and it worked out great for us. I have no complaints. It was all terrific.
Yeah.
Tombstone became a really fascinating character for us.
The series was originally planned to have a 5-season run, with 65 episodes in total, but only 2 seasons were ever aired, and only 26 episodes were ever produced. The series was mainly cancelled due to legal issues on the production side. The series was produced and owned by Sony Television, but Sony lost the rights to make a Spider-Man TV series. It also didn't help that Spectacular Spider-Man aired on Disney XD. Weisman had wrote that Sony had decided to give Disney all the animation rights over Spider-Man, but they kept the rights to Spectacular Spider-Man. Negotiations were underway to find a solution, since neither Sony nor Marvel could continue production of the series. In a Spectacular Radio podcast, Weisman and Cook spoke more on the subject. This is what they had to say.
Kind of the definitive, we hope to be, and what we always tried to make it as, is a definitive show about this show. We feel like we have to ask this question of why wasn't there a third season? Because we have to answer the question, like when we're on little fan forums and they're like, oh, why wasn't there a third season? And we're like, okay. Mm-hmm. So
it's a simple answer.
I know. It really is, but people want to make. I think people's headcanons start running wild.
I think that the answer is complicated. It's just not as complicated as people, it's not as conspiracy driven as people would like to think, but It is a complicated answer. Usually, whether a show, not always, unfortunately, but usually whether a show makes it an additional season is a pretty simple mathematical equation. Did it do well? How much does it cost versus how much money it's bringing in? And unfortunately for us, the answer for Spectacular Spider-Man is more complicated than that. And it goes back to the fact that before Marvel was a studio, when it was just a comic book company, it would license its properties to other studios. And so Sony had the license to do everything Spider-Man in entertainment. Obviously, the big ticket item for that in those days were the big Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. And we came in as Sony's second animated Spider-Man show. They had done a show for MTV already, and we came in and we were their second shot at doing Spider-Man in animation. But for Sony, the big money, obviously, was in the movies. And at some point, Marvel and Sony's relationship was fairly contentious legally. While we were at Sony, Marvel sued Sony 3 times over Spider-Man. And I don't mean over our show. I mean over the property in general. I don't know that those lawsuits ever went to court or anything like that. That's all way above my pay grade. But I know that they filed.
We had one part of that did affect us. Our first DVD.
Yeah, you're right.
It did.
And
because. Go ahead.
That's true. We had originally had plans to have extra footage. In essence, each of our arcs would be edited together as a movie. Everyone was well aware of those plans, but after the first DVD came out, Marvel sued Sony and said, "You can't do this." And
you can only release them. Yeah, they said you can only release them as they aired on TV as 3 separate episodes. So,
right.
So, by the way, I think that would make that first DVD a collector's item if whoever has it.
I've still got it.
So, because of all this, at some point, while we were making season 2, in order to get some concession on the feature film front, Sony agreed to give the animation television rights back to Marvel. Of course, by this time, Marvel was a very successful producer of movies in their own right, and you have to imagine there was some quantity of frustration over the fact that, they're having all this success with Iron Man and Thor and Captain America, and they're building towards their Avengers movies and all that stuff, and yet their one big marquee character, Spider-Man, their single biggest character that they have, they can't make a movie about, and they can't make an animated series about. So at some point, they got the animation rights back to make Spider-Man. And that created a catch-22 for Spectacular Spider-Man. And that catch-22 is straightforward enough, which is that because Sony had given Marvel the rights back to do animated series for Spider-Man, Sony could no longer make Spectacular after the second season. Marvel couldn't make Spectacular either. Marvel couldn't make Spectacular either because Sony owned the version of Spider-Man that was Spectacular. So the only way Marvel could make Spectacular is if they licensed the Spectacular version from Sony. And you could sit there and go, well, then why didn't they do that? And it's like, because that would have been idiotic. And it really would have been.
Mm-hmm.
I understand why for us who made the show and for fans of the show, it doesn't sound idiotic. But financially, it's idiotic. Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, these are companies that have to earn money for their shareholders.
Right.
Why would Marvel pay Sony, having gotten the rights back to the character, why would Marvel pay Sony to do their own character when they could just go and make their version?
Disney soon announced a new animated Spider-Man series, this time adapting the Ultimate Spider-Man run from the comic books. With this announcement, it was clear that Spectacular Spider-Man was never coming back. At the time of this recording, Greg Weisman is working on a new season of Young Justice. He's also working on an animated DC movie called Catwoman Hunted. Victor Cook is an executive producer for the Disney Junior series, Tots. Josh Keaton, the voice of Peter Parker, has a couple of roles in Young Justice, like the Red Hood and the Black Spider. James Taylor, the voice of Harry Osborn, is the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi in LEGO Star Wars, the Skywalker Saga. He was also Mr. Bohoffner in The Loud House. Lacey Chabert, the voice of Gwen Stacy, is playing the character Claire in the upcoming crime drama Acre Beyond the Rye. Vanessa Marshall, the voice of Mary Jane, last voice roles was Black Canary in Young Justice and Lieutenant Otessa Warren in Star Trek Lower Decks.